Welcome to the Festival of Storytellers.
I can't tell you how excited I am to be on right now. It's been a couple of weeks of excitement, getting prepared, and I've done a lot of things in my life, but this has got to be close to the top.
Thank you, Reader's Magnet, and thank you, John, for putting this forth and taking the chance on us authors in presenting this out to the world.
I've enjoyed this immensely, Joanne.
Ellie, so have I. Thank you for who you are, and thank you, Reader's Magnet. You all are beautiful, and you've worked so very hard, and we are blessed.
We are.
I thank everybody that's involved with this process, because we know writers need readers and writers need publishers. We thank Reader's Magnet and everybody that's involved. I love Reader's Magnet. They say, we share your stories with the world.
Good afternoon. I'm so happy to be able to talk to you today. My name is Margaret Krivchenia, and I'm an author of both children's books and adult books. And I want to thank Reader's Magnet for giving me this wonderful opportunity to speak to you and tell you about my books and my journey as an author in the Festival of Storytellers. So I know some of you may have been with me yesterday, but bear with me because I'd like to give you a little more background about myself, some things I didn't tell you yesterday, and we may have some new people on there. So, first of all, I never thought I'd end up being an author. Was the farthest thing from my mind. I grew up in Michigan, and I graduated from Wayne State University with a degree in education. Then I got my master's at the University of Michigan in counseling. And I thought that was going to be my career. And indeed, for 24 years, I was a counselor. But before I was a counselor, I started out at the University of Michigan as a voice major. So I've always had a love of music, and I have been singing my entire life. And I write songs and as well as writing books. But I found after I retired from being a counselor, my mother was living with us. She had Alzheimer's. And I found that, it was just a relaxing therapy for me to start writing. I had grandchildren. I had a 2-year-old grandson, and he would spend the night. And we would go ahead and, have our bath time with our little rubber duckies and our little otters. And he'd say, Grandma, tell me a story. And I'd say, all right, let me read you this book. And he'd say, no, Grandma, can you make up a story? So I started making up the stories, and they surrounded, first of all these little creatures, the ducks and the otters and foxes, and I created this magical forest and where all the animals talked. And so that's how I started writing. I started writing children's books. And we live in Florida right now. As I said, I grew up in Michigan, lived a while in Ohio, and now I've been in Florida for 38 years. So the same house I'm living in now for 38 years, and this is where all the writing began. So I would start telling the stories to my grandson. And finally, someone said, you really should write these down. So I made a big scrapbook. I printed out the story. I made a scrapbook. I illustrated it, and I would give it to my grandson for Christmas as a gift, kind of a memory book. Then I started writing more books. And I ended up writing books. The first series for my grandson was called The Magical World of Prince Harrison William. Then I wrote for my younger grandson, Tales of Parker and Penny. These weren't published. They were all done, printed out and put in the scrapbooks. It was for their memories. I have two granddaughters. And so by that time, everybody was getting older. And I have always loved detective and mystery stories. And I thought I continued to write. And I thought, well, you know what? I'm going to write a detective story, a mystery story where my grandchildren are the main characters. So I started with the Four Cousins mystery stories. And I have four books published right now. The first one was The Ghost of Canyon Camp. The second was The Haunted Lighthouse. The third was The Secret of the Broken Arrow Mine. And the fourth was A Christmas Mystery, which is called The Mysterious Mansion, which I'll be talking about more as the days pass by. Today I'm going to talk about my adult novel that was just published in July called Evermore. Now, I love the children's books. I'm still writing them. They're for ages 8 to 12. I just finished writing the fifth book, The Quest for the Cat's Eye Ruby, which will go into publishing soon. But I always had it on my mind since my mom was living with us and I grew up with my grandparents living with us, that I wanted to write a book about my family. So when my mother was so ill living with us, and I started remembering all the stories my grandmother had told me and my mother had told me about her young life. So the story has to do with, starts out in the 1930s. It is the sweeping tale of the mayor and the Sharples family. My mother fell in love early when she was in high school with this wonderful young man, but it was not to be. Very unusual and tragic events happened. My father, in the meantime, had met her when she was 14. My parents grew up in upstate New York, in Auburn, New York, one of the Finger Lakes, in Owasco Lake. And this is where they lived. This is where my mother met my dad. And he always said to me, you know what? I met your mother when she was 14 years old, and I was 17, and I fell in love with her then. And I always knew someday I'm going to marry this wonderful person. And he did. And mom and dad were married for over 65 years. But the first love of her life was someone that she had met in high school. And my father actually saved her because she was very, very crushed in her senior year, where she wasn't even able to graduate when this love of her life ended. So I start the story of Evermore when my mom is 15 years old, and it's in the 30s, and I take it all the way up to the new millennium and to where she finally, my father is there. They've married 65 years. She has children, grandchildren. And so I tell this story of their life. And yesterday, someone said to me, one of the questions was, well, why should people read it? Well, we all have a story. And this is a story of resiliency of the human spirit, of God always being with us, walking with us in our joys and our sorrows. And all of us have had tragedies in our life and great periods of happiness. And this story shows how those periods of tragedy can be overcome. This is a story of faith-filled people who never lost hope, never gave up in the goodness of God through all they went through. And of course, starting in the 1930s, the story of Evermore traces their journey through the Depression, World War II, and into our present day. So it is a story of hope and of redemption and salvation and coming out better people than they ever thought they could possibly be. And it's a story for all of us. And it is a story of how we should live our life. So Evermore is my latest book. And as I said, it is the story of my family. There's a lot of fact. There is some fiction in here. This tells my memories that I recall Grandma telling me and my mother through her journals. But some of the events, of course, are fiction because I couldn't know everything. But the characters are all real in here. Where they lived in upstate New York on Owasco Lake. I changed the title of Auburn to Shimmering Falls, the village. But the events are actual and they are factual. So the last part of the book tells the story about me. And I'm Mariana in the book, and it tells my husband. And of course, I have added some fiction in there because, people are still alive. So I have added some fiction to that. But how we got engaged, how we were married is true. And so I want you to, if you can, read the story. And people have told me they've stayed up all night reading it, and they can't. It's a page turner. They can't wait to get to the next chapter. And there is a mystery in here, and people have said they never saw it coming. So I will invite you to go ahead and buy Evermore and read it. It is just an absolute beautiful story. And again, it's about my family, and we all have families, and we all have stories to tell. So I also wanted to tell you a little bit more about my grandchildren, the four cousins in the Four Cousins Mystery Series. And someone asked a question: was it hard to make this transformation from writing the children's books into writing an adult novel? And so, I answered the question yesterday. Well, it was, but yet I didn't, I just have this imagination where I could make the transformation easily. And it was an act of love. When I'm writing my children's books, it's all about action, It's all about their personalities and their dialogue. And when I write my children's books, I want there to be a message because they do pray before meals. They have faith in God, and they always turn the life around of someone in the book who is a very troubled person who's going off in the wrong path. So all the books have messages to them, and they all are set in various places that my husband and I have visited, or my grandchildren have visited. The first, The Ghost of Canyon Camp, takes place in Yellowstone. And again, there is a mystery and adventure there. And some people have said, well, why did you choose mysteries and adventures? And I said, well, you know what? My whole life growing up, my home was like a library. My mom loved books. And I grew up with the Hardy Boys and the Nancy Drew books, Trixie Belden, Sue Barton, Student Nurse, the Eight Cousins. I grew up with all these books. And then as I got older, I read all the Bronte books, Jane Eyre, and I just kept going, and I loved books. And our home today, our bookshelves are filled with books. So it was natural for me to write. I love imagination. And I can tell you right now that when I am in writing a book, I'm part of that book. I literally hear the characters talking, and I'll wake up in the middle of the night and I'll think, oh, I can put that in the book in the next chapter, or I'm going to change that word to this word. So when you think about children's books, ages 8 to 12, and you think about an adult, of course, the dialogue is different. In an adult book, you are going to really develop those characters. The dialogue will be more serious. The events will be more serious. Maybe emotions will come in more. There will be action, but the focus will be on the transformation of these people throughout their lives. So the adult books, of course, will have, I would say more serious words in them, more serious topics in them, like Evermore does. But I still have the detective and the mystery and the adventures in there. So I just can tell you that if you have any desire at all to write, do this. Go ahead and write. And in the days ahead, I will tell you exactly how a book comes about, from the idea in my head up to the finished process. It's months long. It's months long in writing. It probably took me 10 months to write Evermore. It might take me 4 months to write a children's story. It depends on if I write every day. Sometimes I'll write in the afternoon. That's my favorite time. I'll write for 2.5 hours. But once you're finished with a book, or you've finally finished, like the latest I've just written, you're not really done because you have to go back and read it all over again. And then you'll go ahead and you'll make changes and you'll think, oh, I think I can say this better. Uh, let's put this in there. This is important for everyone to know. And this is the way they would talk. So I do research. Someone else asked, do you do any research? Yes, I do for every single book. For the first book, Yellowstone, my husband and I have been there 3 times. But I researched the area. I researched the history of Yellowstone. I researched the Native Americans who lived there. I found out the fact that this is where most of the dinosaurs in our country were found. So, it really is fun. Do I believe in ghosts? Well, the Ghost of Canyon Camp isn't really a ghost, a Halloween ghost. You would have to read this to find out exactly what it is. It can be someone that you least expect, that you don't know what it's about. So I believe in real people. But this is the Ghost of Canyon Camp because it's an unexpected character in the book. So I would tell you to go ahead and read that. Another question that someone has had for me was, when you have a book published, do you have a chance to edit? And yes, I edit again and again and again to make the books as perfect as they possibly can be. As I said, Evermore took me over 10 months to write it. It was over 10 months in publication. And it started out by the editors going through and finding all the little mistakes I may have made. And so as far as this is concerned, there will be a sequel to it. I'm already thinking about that, and it's already in my head. And as far as the Four Cousins, there are 4 books now. The 5th book is in my computer, and it's called The Quest for the Cat's Eye Ruby. And that, after I get through reading it again and making all the corrections I want to, I will send it out for publishing. So I will continue. Again, the ideas come to me. And some will say, well, where do you get the stories? Well, for instance, I can tell you that the Cat's Eye Ruby came from my great grandfather's wedding ring, which is set with a cat's eye ruby. And that's the treasure that the mystery is surrounding. So I get my inspiration in various places, and that's where they come from. So for today, I want to read you the prologue from Evermore. Now, as I told you, Evermore is the sweeping tale of the mayor and the Sharples families. My mother's is the mayor's family. She's Lisbeth in the book. Ian is from the Sharples family, and he is the young love of her life. It takes place starting in the 1930s, and again in the Finger Lakes region of upstate New York, on Owasco Lake, in the village of Shimmering Falls. It does tell the story of a young, unforgettable love, but unrelenting forces are set to tear them apart. It tells of their struggle to hold on to their love. And then it brings in this towering figure of Joseph, who is my dad, and how he ends up saving my mom. It tells the story of her best friends, Lita, and her best friend in real life was Alita, so I call her Lita in this, and their parents. And again, it brings in Mariana, and that's who I am in this story. And so it is a beautiful story. And again, it's fact and fiction. And we're going to discuss it at my Christian book club, which is coming up this Friday, because they want to know, well, what's true and what isn't. So this book has sparked a lot of questions from a great many people. So I want to read now the prologue to Evermore. And if you have any questions, I will also try and answer them. A solitary figure was reverently clearing away the newly fallen gold, orange, and crimson leaves that covered the weathered marble gravestone in the small cemetery behind St. Anthony's Church. It was late October, and winter had come early to the Finger Lakes region in upstate New York. The falling leaves on the maple and oak trees were become a cascading waterfall of vibrant colors as the winds of autumn tore them from their summer branches and hurled them to the grass-covered earth below. It was Father Ian's daily task to clear the multicolored carpet from the beloved grave, surrounded by towering trees that stood like sentinels guarding the eternal sleep of those who silently rested here. On close observation, it was quite clear that the priest working so diligently was elderly, yet he seemed to have the energy and vitality of someone many years younger. Father Ian rested for a moment against the rake he had placed firmly in the ground, and regarded the name carved on the cleaned gravestone. Elizabeth Ann Mayer Aubin. Her date of death was 1 year prior at the age of 80. He had reached the exalted age of 83 just last March. Father Ian stood erect and tall. He was over 6 feet in height and still gave the glimmer of the handsome man he must have been in his youth. His hair was snow white for the most part, with just a few strands of black here and there. His eyes were the piercing azure blue they had always been. Even in his humble, thick brown woolen cassock, he was an arresting sight. He had returned to the little village of Shimmering Falls on the shores of Owasco Lake 3 years ago. He had worked well past the normal retirement age of 70, choosing to stay in the mission fields of the Texas-Mexican border. He had run a home for children, lucky enough to escape from the murderous cartels of their homeland. Their parents had been fortunate enough to enter the U.S. legally and had found jobs somewhere as migrant workers. They sent what little money they could to Father Ian and the other devoted priests for the support of their little ones at the Casa Santa Maria Mission, the House of St. Mary. God seemed to provide for this haven as donations appeared when the need was grave. Father Ian blessed himself in gratitude for the Lord's goodness and generosity as he sighed deeply. He so missed the children and the ministry that had become his life's work and salvation. However, 5 years ago, he had heard the inner voice calling to him to come home. It was time to face his past and to offer solace to the woman who lay peacefully at his feet. It had taken 2 years to get his affairs in order at the Casa. His bishop had released him from his duties, and he had officially retired, to the great sadness of all those he had so faithfully loved and served for so many years. He had said farewell amid tears, hugs, and kisses, surrounded by the children he considered his own sons and daughters. But now God had other plans for him. So he had left the noise, chaos, laughter, and 15-hour days for the peace and tranquility of the small parish of St. Anthony's. He helped the pastor to shepherd his flock, and he lived in a small cottage adjacent to the cemetery. It was a quiet life, but the laughter of children still filled his days. In fact, he heard the soft footsteps of one such child hurrying his way. Of course, Isabella would be appalled at the thought that she was considered a child in his eyes. After all, she would be 15 in exactly 1 month. The penetrating azure eyes sparkled as they regarded the beautiful, auburn-haired young woman almost skipping down the cobblestone path toward him. She took his breath away as he was transported back decades to his youth, as the image of her great-grandmother Lisbeth flashed into his memory. He had first met her in this very church, now known as St. Anthony's Chapel. Isabella resembled her in so many ways. She had the warm, rich brown eyes, the thick, lustrous red hair tumbling to her shoulders in soft waves, and the sweetest smile and disposition that drew people to her. Yet she could be stubborn and strong-willed. Father Ian and Isabella had bonded when they first met 3 years ago. She had been intrigued by his life at the Casa Santa Maria Mission. She loved the stories he told of the children and their perilous lives. She had vowed to work at the castle as soon as she was old enough. At the present time, though, her overwhelming interest was in learning the history of her family, especially one person in particular, her great-grandmother, Elizabeth Ann Mayer Aubin, better known as Lizbeth. Since Isabella had been told how closely she resembled her relative, she had conjured up all sorts of harrowing and romantic stories about her. She had a vivid imagination, and when she discovered that Father Ian had been acquainted with this mysterious woman when she was her age, there was no stopping the questions she had for him. Isabella could not fathom the depths of pain the answers to these questions would bring. Yet Father Ian thought that it was time to tell this enduring love story to someone. Who better than the great-granddaughter who had fallen in love with the memory and life of the woman who embodied all that Isabella was? It was a fitting end, a coming full circle, as the saying goes. Though the distinguished, still imposing man in his clerical garb turned to his enthralled audience and asked her to walk with him as he began the tale that had been his bedfellow, his haunting remembrance for the past 60 years. And this is the prologue, and I invite you to follow this story as it unfolds. I want to thank all of you for listening to me today, and I hope that I can see you in the days ahead as we continue down my journey of writing, of Evermore, and also of the Four Cousins Mystery Series, which are going to get into more detail in the days ahead. And I think you will absolutely love these books. And remember, the Four Cousins is for ages 8 to 12. They can be purchased through my website, fourcousinsmysteryseries.com, and you'll receive an autographed signed copy, not just by me, but by the Four Cousins. Also, you may order this book, Evermore, through my website. And again, I will sign this, and shipping is free of charge. So I look forward to seeing all of you in the days ahead. And remember, think about your families. Think about the story that you all have to tell. And think about how good God has been to all of us as He has brought us to this moment in time. So I will look forward to seeing all of you again. And please have a blessed day and a wonderful week ahead. And take a look at your children and hug them all. Hug your grandchildren, hug your husband. God bless all of you. Thank you. So please come back again. I will be here tomorrow at 3:30. Tomorrow, Thursday, Friday at 5:30, and all next week I will be here again at 3:30. So, just to show you again, Evermore in the Four Cousins Mystery Series. I'll tell you a little bit about the books to come in the following days. So there will definitely be more stories to tell all of you. And please share with me your stories. Share with me on my website, fourcousinsmysteries.com, on Facebook, on Instagram. Share your stories, and I will definitely respond and talk to all of you. And I look forward to seeing all of you again. Thank you so much for your kind comments and for asking whatever questions you might have concerning these books. I hope I have been able to answer them for you. Thank you.